The cold white lights of the ICU room at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta reflected off Jack Carter's pale face. He lay motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by a tangle of medical equipment, their faint, monotonous beeps sounding like forgotten cries for help. Outside the glass door, a tense figure stood frozen like a statue. It was Duke, the loyal canine dog, his deep brown eyes never once straying from his handler lying inside. Duke had been standing there for hours, his strong, muscular frame tense with worry. He pressed his cold, wet nose against the glass, as if trying to reach Jack, the man who had once risked his own life to save him from the clutches of death years ago. But this time, Duke sensed a different kind of danger creeping slowly toward the man he loved more than anything. Just then, Dr. Morrison entered the room, adjusting Jack's IV drip with slow, deliberate movements. Duke's eyes sharpened instantly. A dog that had undergone hundreds of hours of rigorous training, that had witnessed countless high-risk chases, now picked up on something unusual. A low growl began to rumble from deep within his throat, a sound quiet but urgent, like a silent alarm. But out in the hallway, no one in the busy medical team paid it any mind. Officer Andrew Thompson, Jack's partner, stood nearby and gently patted Duke's head, trying to calm him with a soft but clearly helpless voice. "It's okay, Duke. Jack's in good hands. Easy, buddy." But Duke couldn't calm down. He paced back and forth, his paws restless against the icy hospital floor. His ears stood erect, every sense in his body stretched to its limit, tuned to the slightest movement inside the room. He couldn't put into words what he felt, but every cell in his body was screaming that something was wrong. Suddenly, Dr. Morrison's eyes flicked toward the glass and locked with Duke's. Duke caught a flash of hesitation in the man's gaze. Just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for Duke to know he wasn't imagining things. The danger he sensed was real. The growl in his throat grew louder, more defined. From down the corridor, a young doctor named Emily Reed approached the ICU. She paused when she heard the strange sound coming from the K9. Her curious brown eyes turned toward Duke. Having worked closely with many therapy dogs, Emily knew, when a dog acts out of the ordinary, there's always a reason. "Is he okay?" Emily asked Andrew Thompson, concern in her voice. Andrew shrugged, defeated. "No idea. Dr. Morrison says Jack's still critical but stabilizing. Duke's been like this ever since the doctor went in. I don't know what he's picked up on." Emily looked deep into Duke's eyes, filled with tension and something close to desperation. The dog looked back at her, as if trying to send her a message. Urgent, but impossible to express. Then Duke turned to look at the ICU room, and back at Emily. Dawn settled gently over Atlanta Memorial, but the hospital remained wrapped in silence. Duke lay curled up in front of the ICU door, where Jack was still fighting for his life. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion after a sleepless night, but his senses had not rested for a moment. The slightest noise would snap his ears to attention, alert and sharp. At that moment, the ICU door creaked open. Footsteps sounded. Light, familiar but laced with suspicion. Duke lifted his head, watching closely. Dr. Morrison entered the room, his white coat catching the sterile glow of the hospital lights. Duke sprang to his feet, his back arched, body tensing like a live wire. He had caught a scent, something both familiar and terrifying, emanating from the doctor. A chemical odor. The same one from the airport case. Duke remembered it clearly. He had sniffed out that exact chemical right before gunshots erupted at the airport. It was the one scent he hadn't alerted in time. One mistake that left Jack collapsing under a hail of bullets. Duke would not let it happen again. He barked furiously, lunging hard against the leash that kept him restrained. Startled, Officer Andrew Thompson stood up quickly, grabbing Duke's leash with both hands, trying to keep the dog under control. His brows furrowed, clearly confused by Duke's behavior. "Easy, Duke! It's just the doctor, no one's hurting Jack!" But Duke refused to back down. He pulled harder, eyes locked with laser focus on Dr. Morrison, who was now leaning over the bed, adjusting the machines surrounding Jack. This wasn't overreaction. Duke knew something was wrong. He kept barking, each sharp cry echoing like a blaring alarm down the hospital corridor, drawing the attention of nurses and nearby patients. Just then, Dr. Emily Reed rounded the corner, drawn by the urgency in the canine's voice. She had been watching Duke since the day before. She knew he didn't bark without cause. His reactions were always targeted, always precise, and each time it happened when Dr. Morrison appeared. That was enough to make her pause. She moved closer, silently observing how Duke's entire body was locked in a focused stare toward Morrison. It was as if he was trying to say something critical, something only she noticed. Emily turned to Andrew and asked, her voice calm but serious, "Officer Thompson, has Duke reacted like this to anyone else besides Dr. Morrison?" Andrew shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "No, doctor. Only when Morrison comes near Jack. I figured he's just overly anxious. Jack's injury really messed with him." Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on Duke, who was pouring every ounce of energy into warning them about something. She trusted Duke's instincts more than most people realized. Her mind flashed back to her early days working with military dogs as a field medic in Afghanistan. Back then, she'd seen dogs detect explosives and toxic chemicals no human could sense. And now she was sure of one thing. Duke had picked up on something serious, and she needed to act immediately. Noticing Emily's watchful gaze, Dr. Morrison quickly wrapped up his equipment check and stepped out of the room with a slightly rushed demeanor. As he passed Duke, the dog lunged forward, yanking the leash so hard that Andrew nearly lost his balance. "Duke, come on!" Andrew shouted, tightening his grip on the leash. But Duke kept pulling, his eyes locked on Morrison's figure retreating down the hallway. Emily followed Morrison with her eyes, a flicker of suspicion and unease crossing her face. It suddenly struck her. Since Jack had been admitted, this was the first time she had actually paid close attention to the doctor. Morrison had only transferred to Memorial a week ago, arriving with an impressive resume from a hospital in Savannah. Despite his short time there, he had already been assigned to one of the hospital's most critical patients, Jack. Emily recalled a brief introduction during a staff meeting, where the department head mentioned Morrison's extensive experience in emergency medicine and intensive care, making him well-suited for high-risk cases like this. Still, Emily had never worked directly with him, or had more than a few brief interactions. He was reserved, kept mostly to himself, appearing only when necessary, and disappearing just as quickly. That alone set him apart from the rest of the staff at Memorial, who were known for their openness and camaraderie. There was something off. Emily had worked with plenty of new doctors before, but none had been as guarded as Morrison. He moved quickly, avoided long conversations, and seemed uninterested in discussing his past work in detail. At first, she had chalked it up to a newcomer adjusting to a new workplace, but now, combined with Duke's heightened and specific response, and Morrison's tense, evasive reaction, it all seemed too deliberate to ignore. Emily knelt beside Duke, placing a gentle hand on his taut fur. The dog stopped barking and turned to her, as if pleading for understanding. Emily whispered softly in his ear, "I hear you, Duke. You're not wrong. We'll find out the truth." Duke felt the warmth in her voice, and he looked up at her with a glimmer of hope. For the first time since Jack was injured, someone believed him. He slowly calmed, sitting down at Emily's side, though his eyes remained fixed on the direction Morrison had gone. Emily rose to her feet and leaned toward Andrew, speaking quietly but firmly. "I think we need to keep a closer eye on Morrison. I don't think Duke's reacting without reason." Andrew hesitated, but eventually nodded. He looked at Duke, and for the first time, a trace of doubt flickered in his mind about the doctor. Meanwhile, Duke sat silently by Emily's side, ears still perked, eyes locked on the end of the hallway as if waiting for the battle to come. Because Duke knew, danger was still hovering around Jack, and this time, it would be up to him to protect the man he loved more than life itself. The sunset spilled quietly through the long glass windows of Memorial Hospital, casting a muted golden hue across the hallway. Duke was still there, his sorrowful eyes fixed on the ICU room where Jack lay unmoving, each fragile breath tethered to a network of cold, impersonal machines. Duke slowly lowered himself to the floor, resting his head on his front paws. His eyes began to close as vivid memories of that fateful airport mission surged back, uninvited. For Duke, that day remained an unhealed wound, a quiet pain that returned every time he remembered. That day, Atlanta Airport was packed, chaotic sounds of rushing crowds blending with constant loudspeaker announcements. Duke walked alongside Jack, his eyes and ears on high alert, scanning for any suspicious sign. He always felt proud working with Jack, felt safe just seeing that calm, confident stride beside him. Then suddenly, a sharp chemical scent cut through the air, stopping Duke in his tracks. It was an unusual, dangerous smell, one he had been rigorously trained to detect. Duke froze, body stiff, his gaze locked on the cargo area near the boarding gates. Jack immediately picked up on Duke's signal. He crouched beside the dog, gently touched his head, and said with firm conviction, "Good job, Duke. Let's move." They approached cautiously. Duke led the way, nose close to the floor, breath steady but tense. The chemical scent grew stronger, sharper, setting off alarm bells inside him. Danger was close, waiting to explode. As they neared the cargo zone, a group of strangers nearby suddenly became visibly tense, turning to walk away in a hurry. Duke caught every nuance of their behavior. He stepped in front of Jack, barking loudly, a commanding warning, trying to stop them from fleeing. "Police, don't move!" Jack's voice rang out, steady and strong, but chaos erupted instantly. Gunshots cracked through the air, so fast that Duke barely felt the cold rush of air near his ear before he turned in panic. His eyes widened in fear as he saw Jack sprinting toward Andrew Thompson, who had unknowingly stepped into the line of fire. Jack leapt forward, pushing Andrew out of the bullet's path. In that split second, time seemed to slow. Jack collapsed. Andrew's anguished scream rose above the chaos. Duke ran to Jack immediately, eyes wide with shock, unable to process what was happening. His beloved handler was lying still, blood soaking through the familiar uniform. Everything inside Duke shattered. He couldn't understand why he hadn't reacted faster, why he couldn't stop it. A desperate whimper escaped him as he tried to lick Jack's pale face, willing him to wake up. But Jack didn't move. His eyes slowly closed, and his breath grew fainter, fading beneath Andrew's desperate cries. Around them, the airport descended into panic. But to Duke, none of it mattered anymore. The only thing that existed in that moment was Jack. Motionless on the floor, the one person Duke valued more than his own life. A crushing sense of failure weighed on him. He had let his handler fall into danger, and there was nothing he could do to undo it. Blinking, Duke pulled himself back into the dim present of the hospital. He stood and walked closer to the ICU glass, eyes searching Jack's sleeping face. A sharp ache twisted in his chest, wrapped in a silent vow. He would never let Jack fall into danger again. He would protect him with everything he had, even if it cost him his life. Just then, a gentle hand rested on his back, pulling him gently from the haunting memories. Emily sat quietly beside him, her voice soft and kind. "We all need Jack, Duke. He's going to wake up. He has to." Duke leaned into her hand, silent, his eyes never leaving Jack. He understood what she meant, but deep inside, he also knew the danger wasn't over. What happened at the airport had only been the beginning. And this time, he would not fail. The canine dog promised himself he would never leave Jack's side, no matter what came next, even if it meant giving his life to protect him. As night settled over Memorial Hospital, the building slipped into stillness. The white coats had mostly disappeared, leaving behind only the soft, dim glow of hallway nightlights. Emily stood near a window, watching Duke still sitting silently in front of Jack's ICU room. She knew, deep in those unwavering brown eyes, Duke's vigilance had never eased, not for a single second. Duke quietly scanned the corridor, his breathing steady but tight with tension. Morrison hadn't returned all day, but the unease inside Duke hadn't faded. Every time he looked into the room where Jack lay, something inside him whispered that he was missing something crucial. Then suddenly, faint footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. In an instant, Duke's trained instincts kicked in. His head shot up, body stiffening as he spotted a familiar but suspicious figure approaching the ICU. It was Morrison. His eyes darted around, movements tense and hyper-aware, like a man trying not to be seen. Duke quickly assessed the hallway. Emily had stepped away minutes ago to get files. Andrew had just gone out too. No one else was around. Duke understood immediately. This was the moment Morrison had been waiting for, and Duke would not let him near Jack again. Morrison quietly opened the ICU door and slipped inside, fingers rummaging through the pocket of his white coat. Duke sprang to his feet without hesitation. This time, no leash held him back. In a blur, he charged into the room. Inside, Morrison was hunched over Jack's bedside, a syringe already plunged into the IV line. Duke barked, a loud, commanding roar that echoed through the room like an explosion. Morrison jolted, whipping around in panic. In that moment, Duke locked eyes with him, and what he saw wasn't confusion or surprise, but something all too familiar. Fear and guilt, the same look Duke had seen in countless fugitives before. Without giving Morrison another second, Duke launched himself forward with staggering force. The syringe fell to the floor, spilling a thin trail of clear liquid. Morrison panicked, struggling wildly under Duke's weight, then bolted out of the room. Duke gave chase instantly. His heart pounded as his paws pounded louder, claws tapping against the cold tiles of the empty hallway. Morrison ran like a man possessed. But Duke was faster. He lunged, slamming him to the ground, teeth clenched, pinning the man with fierce precision. At that moment, Andrew returned from the restroom and froze at the chaotic scene. He rushed forward, eyes wide, voice raised. "Duke, what's going on?" Duke kept Morrison down, his eyes burning with intensity and purpose. Andrew could tell something was very, very wrong. He dropped to the floor to help restrain Morrison, grabbing the man's arms and turning his face up. "What were you doing in Jack's room? What is this?" Andrew shouted, eyes flicking to the syringe lying near the door. Morrison said nothing. His breath came fast and shallow, eyes avoiding contact. Just then, Emily appeared at the hallway's edge, her expression filled with alarm as she took in the scene. Without a word, she rushed into Jack's room. She checked every line, every tube, then paused. Her eyes fell on the small chemical trail on the floor. A strange smell lingered in the air, faint but distinct. Her stomach turned as realization hit her. "Andrew, that's poison. He was trying to poison Jack," Emily shouted, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. Andrew clenched his jaw and tightened his grip on the man. "Who are you? Speak now!" Finally, Morrison gasped, the fight draining from his body. His eyes filled with dread, and his voice broke as the truth slipped out. My real name is James Wilson. I'm not a doctor. I was just following orders." The hospital alarm blared. Security officers stormed the hallway in seconds. Duke didn't move until the handcuffs clicked into place. Only then did he unclench his teeth from Wilson's coat. But his eyes never left the man who had come so close to killing Jack. James Wilson was dragged away by security. Duke watched him go, eyes cold and sharp. Then he turned and padded back into the room, walking to Jack's bedside. Emily knelt beside him, her hand gently stroking his head, voice soft with emotion. "You saved him, Duke. You did it." Duke looked up at her, then back at Jack, who now lay peacefully on the hospital bed. For the first time since that nightmare at the airport, Duke felt the weight in his heart begin to lift. He had been there in time. He had protected the one he loved most. The alarm finally stopped. The red warning lights in Memorial Hospital's hallway dimmed, leaving behind an eerie silence. James Wilson had been taken away by police, but the tension and confusion lingered in every eye that had witnessed the chaos. Yet Duke, the loyal K9, still couldn't settle. Emily knelt beside Jack and thoroughly checked his condition again. When she was sure everything was stable, she let out a quiet breath, but her eyes still held the weight of worry. Andrew stepped up beside her, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I can't believe it, that an imposter got in here so easily." Emily didn't respond. Her gaze shifted to Duke. The dog stood by Jack's bed, his entire body rigid. His eyes were fixed on the door, and his movements were restless, like he was trying to signal that this wasn't over. "What is it, Duke?" Andrew asked, moving closer and resting a hand on the dog's soft coat. He could feel the tension humming beneath Duke's skin. Duke looked at Andrew, then turned to Emily, his eyes filled with urgency. He gave a low, sharp bark, then turned toward the door, glancing back again and again, clearly saying, "Follow me. Something's still wrong." Emily caught the seriousness in Duke's gaze and immediately turned to Andrew, voice quick and firm. "It looks like Duke's picked up on something else. We should follow him." Andrew nodded without hesitation. He knew Duke never reacted without reason. Duke took the lead, his body moving swiftly down the corridor toward the far end of the hospital, where the basement level began, a place rarely visited. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The dim fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting shadows that unsettled both Emily and Andrew. "Where are you taking us, Duke?" Emily asked softly, though her feet never slowed. She trusted him. Duke didn't answer, but the determined look in his eyes and the strong rhythm of his steps made one thing clear. They had to keep going. He stopped in front of an old, rusted steel door tucked in a hidden corner of the basement. Emily and Andrew exchanged a tense look before stepping closer. Duke barked sharply and scratched at the door with urgent force. Andrew tried the handle. "It's locked," he said under his breath, immediately raising his radio to call for security backup. While they waited, Duke barked louder, ramming his body against the door, trying with everything he had to force it open. Then, a muffled, barely audible sound came from the other side. Both Emily and Andrew froze. Emily pressed her ear to the door and called out, "Is someone in there? We're going to get you out." A weak voice called back, filled with fear but also relief. I'm Morrison. Dr. Thomas Morrison. Please help me." Emily and Andrew stared at each other in shock. The man who had been arrested was an imposter. The real Dr. Morrison was trapped behind this door. Security arrived moments later, using specialized tools to break the lock. The door finally burst open, and flashlight beams lit the dark room inside. Without hesitation, Duke rushed in and ran straight to the real Morrison, who was tied to a worn chair in the corner. The doctor looked up weakly, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes were full of hope and gratitude. Duke approached him, tail wagging hard, nuzzling his trembling hand as if to say, "You're safe now. You're not alone." Emily and Andrew hurried in, freeing Dr. Morrison from the ropes. He gasped for air, his voice shaking with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for getting to me in time. I didn't think I'd make it out. I've been locked in here for 2 days." Emily gently checked his vitals, her touch careful and calming. "You're safe now, Dr. Morrison. You're going to be okay." Andrew stood beside her, face tense. "Do you remember anything? Can you tell us what happened?" Morrison nodded, his breath still labored. "There was a man. He wanted to impersonate me to get access to a patient. He meant to harm him. I overheard bits of his plan before he thought I'd passed out." Emily and Andrew exchanged a grim look, then turned to Duke, who was still standing firmly beside Morrison. The dog looked back at them, his eyes fierce, steady, and full of purpose. He didn't need words. His presence alone spoke volumes. "Whatever happens next, I'm not leaving. I'll protect the people I love, no matter what." After the shocking events, tension at Memorial Hospital was higher than ever. The discovery of the real doctor, Morrison being held captive in the basement, sent a wave of concern through the entire medical staff. No one doubted Duke anymore. The canine dog had proven that his instincts were sharper and more reliable than even the most advanced equipment. From that point on, security around Jack's ICU room was tightened. Additional surveillance cameras were installed, and anyone entering or exiting was thoroughly screened by internal security. Every staff member had to undergo background checks before being allowed near Jack. Meanwhile, Duke's presence had become an invisible but powerful shield, constant, silent, and unshakable. Emily and Andrew stayed at the hospital around the clock, never leaving Jack's side. Under the care of the real doctor, Morrison, and the medical team, Jack's condition began to improve. Duke remained by the door, eyes fixed on the bed, patiently waiting for his handler to wake. 5 days passed in quiet tension and hope, until finally, the moment everyone had waited for arrived. It was early morning. Sunlight filtered softly through the hospital window when Jack slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he felt was a blur of confusion and pain. But the moment he saw Emily and Andrew's emotional faces, a wave of relief washed over him. "Welcome back," Emily whispered, her warm smile blooming. Andrew nodded beside her, calm and reassured. "How long have I been out?" Jack croaked, his voice weak but clear. 5 days, Jack. You really had us worried," Andrew replied, emotion tightening his voice. Jack glanced to the side of the bed and met Duke's eyes, filled with loyalty and joy. The dog immediately stood up, tail wagging excitedly, stepping closer as if to make sure Jack was truly awake. Jack reached out and rested his hand on Duke's head, gently stroking him. He felt the warmth of his trusted friend, and the smile on his face grew clearer. "Good boy, Duke. You did so well," Jack whispered, his heart brimming with gratitude. Duke nudged his head into Jack's palm, as if to say he had never left, not even for a second. Emily sat down beside the bed, her voice soft but serious. "Jack, a lot happened while you were unconscious. You need to hear the full story to understand where we are now." Jack listened in silence, his expression growing more intense as Emily and Andrew recounted everything. How Duke had discovered the imposter doctor, how his warning stopped a fatal injection just in time, and how they had rescued the real Dr. Morrison from captivity. With each detail, Jack's face grew more grave. When the story ended, he leaned back against the pillow, deep in thought. It was clear to him. What happened wasn't random. There was something bigger hiding beneath it all. A dangerous force was out there, and someone wanted him gone. "I think we've stumbled onto something much bigger than we thought," Jack said slowly, his voice steady. "That airport case. It wasn't just about chemical smuggling." Andrew nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking the same. Wilson impersonating a doctor and trying to poison you right inside the hospital. That kind of move takes power, planning. There's something organized behind this, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep it quiet." Emily looked at Jack, her concern mixed with resolve. "You have to be careful now, Jack. Security's tighter, but we don't know what else could be coming." Jack nodded. His eyes shifted back to Duke, the dog who had never left his side. He knew Duke had saved his life, not just with strength, but with that extraordinary instinct of his. But Jack also knew this was just the beginning. If they were going to chase the truth into the dark, there would be no turning back. He placed his hand gently on Duke's head, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Thank you, my friend. Without you, I don't think I would have made it back." Duke pressed his head into Jack's chest, his eyes bright with pride and joy. He couldn't speak, but in his heart, he knew. Jack's safety, his awakening. This was the reward for everything Duke had fought for. Morning sunlight streamed gently through the hospital window, casting pale golden rays across Jack's face as he slowly emerged from days of unconsciousness. He lay in his hospital bed, his hand instinctively resting on the soft fur of Duke, who was curled up right beside him, radiating warmth, comfort, and unwavering loyalty. In the quiet stillness of the ICU room, Jack drifted into memories, back to a time long ago, to the very first moment he met Duke. His eyes grew misty as the past washed over him. The days when they weren't yet partners, when the battered little dog before him didn't even have a name. Back then, Jack Carter was working a special assignment, dismantling an illegal dogfighting ring on the outskirts of Atlanta. When Jack entered the abandoned building, he was hit with a wave of heartbreak. Dozens of dogs, caged and injured, bore brutal scars from forced battles. They had been made to fight, to suffer, for nothing but the twisted amusement of cruel men. Jack remembered opening the last door in a dark corner, and how it shattered him. A small, emaciated dog lay barely breathing on the cold floor, its eyes dulled with exhaustion. The dog's body trembled, blood seeping from deep wounds. But in its fading eyes, Jack saw something that made his chest tighten. A flicker of hope, desperate and pleading. Jack quickly shrugged off his uniform jacket and wrapped the fragile dog gently in it, lifting him with extreme care. The dog's blood soaked through the fabric, but Jack didn't care. All he could think about was keeping this broken little life alive. "Hold on, buddy," Jack whispered, his heart clenching as the dog let out a faint whimper in his arms. He ran, through danger, through filth and blood and sweat, not thinking of himself, only of the life he had to save. In the days that followed, Jack never left the special care unit at the animal hospital. He gave the dog a name, Duke, a promise of strength and courage he believed the little one would someday grow into. Slowly, Duke began to heal, day by day, under Jack's gentle care. Every look Duke gave him was filled with a gratitude so deep it went beyond words. It wasn't long before Jack realized Duke was special. Despite the trauma he had endured, both physical and emotional, Duke showed extraordinary intelligence, sharp instincts, and an unshakable loyalty. Jack decided to train him, to make Duke a K-9 partner, not out of duty, but out of a deep respect for the soul he had saved. He saw in Duke not just a survivor, but a hero waiting to rise. From that day on, Jack and Duke were inseparable. Together they faced countless missions and dangers. Duke grew stronger, smarter, braver, proving to everyone that a once wounded dog, abandoned and broken, could become a force of strength if given love and a second chance. Jack smiled gently, returning to the present. He turned to see Duke sleeping peacefully beside him. This time Duke was the hero. He had saved Jack from the brink of death. A swell of gratitude and pride filled Jack's chest. He understood now. Duke remembered everything. Duke knew Jack had saved his life once, and now he had returned the favor. Right then, Duke stirred, slowly opening his eyes and lifting his head to look at Jack with affection. The dog gave a soft lick to Jack's hand, a quiet gesture of love. Jack smiled, deeply moved, and whispered, "Thank you, Duke. You probably don't even know it, but you saved my life." Duke pressed his head into Jack's palm, his breathing warm and steady. He couldn't speak, but his eyes said everything. From deep within, Duke remembered the darkness he came from, and the man who pulled him into the light. The love Jack had given him was eternal, and Duke had vowed to return that love with every breath for the rest of his life. Emily and Andrew entered the room, their expressions softening as they witnessed the emotional moment between man and dog. Emily spoke gently. "The bond you two have, it might be the most powerful thing I've ever seen." Andrew nodded, eyes filled with quiet admiration. "Yeah, Duke isn't just a dog anymore. He's part of our lives, part of our story." Jack looked up at his two colleagues, smiling with deep gratitude and pride. He knew, rescuing Duke from that dark place all those years ago had been the right decision. And now, Duke had proven something even greater. That unconditional love between a human and a dog could heal the deepest wounds, overcome any threat, and offer hope to those who'd once given up on it. In that moment, Jack understood more clearly than ever. No matter what trials lay ahead, no matter what dangers still lingered in the shadows, he and Duke would face them together. And no matter what came, they would never be alone on the road to truth and justice. During his recovery at Memorial Hospital, Jack never once felt at ease. Despite the tightened security, a constant sense of danger loomed over him, unseen but close. Especially after Duke exposed the imposter, Jack's instincts told him that every event, The airport case, the hospital infiltration, was part of something much larger, more complex, and far more dangerous. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, Jack suddenly remembered his personal backpack, the one he had with him during the mission at the airport. It had been returned by the police and was sitting quietly in the corner of the hospital room. Jack decided to go through it once more, hoping to find something he might have missed. He walked over, unzipped the bag, and pulled out a stack of old documents he had picked up at the airport during the shootout. At the time, he had assumed they were just routine paperwork related to the smuggling operation, and hadn't gotten the chance to report them before he was injured. But now, holding the files again, something in his chest stirred. His heartbeat quickened. He flipped through the pages. Dense, technical terms and cryptic codes jumped out at him. The more he read, the colder he felt. What lay before him wasn't just alarming, it was horrifying. The documents referenced the same chemicals that he and Duke had detected at the airport. But these weren't ordinary materials used for medicine or military-grade pharmaceuticals. The notes, meticulously detailed, revealed something far more sinister. A specialized compound being developed as a biological weapon, disguised under the perfect cover. Medical treatments for military and government use. Jack's breath caught. He realized in that moment that he and Duke had accidentally stumbled upon the threshold of a highly covert bioweapons trafficking operation. This wasn't a case of small-time smugglers. They were up against a vast, well-funded organization, armed with influence, power, and global reach. Just then, Duke lifted his head sharply. Ears perked, body tense. The dog stepped closer to Jack, sniffed the edge of the documents, then let out a loud, urgent bark. "What is it, Duke?" Jack whispered, one hand resting on the dog's head, while his eyes stayed locked on the page. Duke began pawing insistently at a specific document. Jack looked down and caught sight of a name that appeared repeatedly throughout the paper's Biogenics Corporation. Jack froze, a chill running through his spine. He had heard that name before, once or twice, in classified military reports. He had never imagined that a renowned military pharmaceutical company could be at the center of something this dark. But now he knew. This was the secret they had been so desperate to keep buried. He turned to Duke, his voice low and tense. "Duke, we just uncovered something dangerous. This might be why they want me gone." Duke looked straight into Jack's eyes, and his gaze shone with fierce resolve. The dog understood. This was no longer just a case. This was war. A war between truth and silence, between life and death. Duke lowered his head and pressed close to Jack's leg, as if to say, "No matter what's coming, I'm staying with you." Jack knew he had to report what he'd found to the authorities, but he also knew that revealing it too soon could put him in even greater danger. With steady hands, he carefully stacked the documents and slid them under his pillow. Out of sight, but not out of mind. He would reach out to the one person he trusted most. But first, he had to prepare. The next move had to be precise, and there would be no room for mistakes. After the long, tense days at Memorial Hospital, Jack was finally discharged and allowed to return home. But relief never came. The secrets he had uncovered, the biological weapons network he had stumbled into, haunted his every thought. Danger, he knew, was still circling him from all sides. Jack chose not to share any of it, not even with Emily or Andrew, whom he trusted deeply. The reason was simple and painful. The truth touched the military, the very institution he served. He couldn't risk the lives of those he loved, especially Duke, his most loyal companion. From this point on, this battle was his alone. The car rolled quietly through the fading light, carrying Jack and Duke toward his small, peaceful house on the outskirts of Atlanta. It had always been Jack's place of calm, a refuge after each mission. But this time, as the car turned onto the familiar narrow road, Duke suddenly grew restless. He let out a low whine, eyes darting around with growing tension. Jack immediately noticed the shift in Duke's behavior. The dog's ears were rigid, his breathing shallow and fast, muscles coiled tight with alertness. "What is it, Duke?" Jack asked softly, eyes scanning their surroundings with care. Duke responded with another anxious whine, his gaze locked on the house ahead. Jack didn't need more than that. He had always trusted Duke's instincts. And Duke had never been wrong. He pulled the car to a stop at a distance from the house, watching carefully. On the surface, everything looked quiet, eerily so. But the unease in Jack's chest was growing stronger by the second. This was a moment to trust his partner more than ever. Without hesitation, Jack turned the car around a side road behind the house, parking beneath a thick canopy of trees, hidden from view. Duke's body remained tense. He let out a low, sharp bark, a warning that danger was very close. Jack stepped quietly out of the car, retrieving his sidearm, every muscle alert. He gave Duke a silent hand signal. The dog followed closely as they moved with precision through the backyard. As they approached, Jack saw it. The back door to the house was slightly ajar. The lock had been broken, sloppily, an obvious forced entry. He crouched low behind a bush, eyes locked on the house. Duke pressed against his side, muscles taut, completely focused. Jack's pulse quickened when he heard faint sounds coming from inside. Rustling, shuffling, and low, urgent voices. He understood instantly. The organization had sent people to search his home for the evidence. But Jack had been careful. The documents weren't here. They were always with him, hidden and secure. Inside, a voice snapped with frustration. "There's nothing here! Where the hell is it?" "Keep looking. If we don't find it, we're dead," another voice replied. Colder, harsher. Jack placed a calming hand on Duke's head, signaling him to stay quiet. He knew rushing in now would be suicide. He needed another plan, one that was smart, not reckless. Slowly and silently, he began to retreat. Step by careful step, he and Duke slipped back toward the car beneath the trees. Duke followed without a sound, his every movement careful, his loyalty absolute. When they reached the vehicle, Jack finally exhaled, but his eyes were sharp, full of focused determination. "You did great, Duke. If it weren't for you, we'd have walked straight into a trap." He stroked Duke's head, overwhelmed with gratitude for the dog who had once again proven to be more than a protector. He was family. Duke tilted his head, gently nudging Jack's palm with his nose, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, Jack felt the strength of their bond more than ever. It was that connection, unspoken, unbreakable, that had always carried them through danger, and would continue to do so now. Jack started the engine, guiding the car away from what had once been a safe haven, now turned deadly. He knew it was time to disappear, at least for a while, until he could figure out his next move. He had become a target, and the people hunting him wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, or silenced him for good. As the car pulled away from the small house that had once meant peace, Jack checked the rearview mirror, eyes steeled with resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. As long as Duke was with him, he wasn't alone. Duke sat quietly beside him, powerful in his silence. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, radiating loyalty and unshakable courage. He didn't understand the complexity of the human world or its conspiracies, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Jack was in danger, and Duke would protect him with everything he had. Darkness blanketed the deserted road, the headlights from Jack's car casting a faint glow across the cold asphalt. His heart pounded, breath tight, as the vehicle sped away from the house that was no longer safe. His thoughts raced about the people hunting him, those who would stop at nothing to bury the secret he had uncovered by chance. Duke sat beside him in the passenger seat, his eyes locked on the side window, ears stiff, breaths short and shallow, a clear sign of heightened alert. Jack noticed instantly. Duke was trying to warn him. He glanced at the rearview mirror, and a chill surged down his spine. Headlights. A car was following them, close enough to track, far enough to not raise suspicion. "We're being followed," Jack muttered tensely, gripping the steering wheel with one hand while the other grabbed his phone. He called the only person he could trust, Andrew. The line rang just a few times before Andrew's voice came through, sharp and serious. "Jack, what's going on?" "Andrew, I'm being tailed. They hit my house, now they're right behind me. I need a safe place, now." Andrew didn't hesitate. "Stay calm. I know a spot. Head north, take Route 20, then make a right at 117 Pine Road. It's an abandoned warehouse out near the edge of town. I'll alert security and have backup on the way." Jack memorized the address, adjusted the steering wheel gently, taking care not to make any sudden moves that might give away his plan. Duke remained still, eyes glued to the mirror, body coiled like a spring. Jack glanced at Duke and asked quietly but seriously, "Got any ideas, partner?" As if understanding every word, Duke suddenly turned his head toward a narrow, unlit road up ahead. Jack caught the signal. That was a forest path, dense and dark enough to shake anyone trailing them. No time to second guess. Jack flicked off the headlights, swerved the wheel, and veered sharply onto the rough road. The car jolted violently, tires grinding against dirt and gravel. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle reacted fast, its headlights flashing through the trees, closing the distance. "Hold on, Duke," Jack muttered through gritted teeth, navigating the tight, twisting trail. Duke stayed steady, eyes never leaving the rear, bracing for whatever came next. Just when it seemed they might get away, the car behind them suddenly switched on its high beams and surged forward, clearly intending to force a stop. Jack's heartbeat thundered in his chest. Cold sweat dripped down his temple. Then, at the height of tension, Duke turned sharply to the left and let out a sharp bark. Jack followed his gaze. A narrow footpath led downhill into a gully, partially hidden by thick underbrush. The perfect spot to ditch the car and vanish. Without hesitation, Jack slammed the brakes, leapt out, and motioned for Duke to follow. They dove into the dense foliage, lungs heaving but feet quiet, moving like shadows. The pursuing car screeched to a stop just seconds later. Heavy footsteps hit the ground. At least 2 men. "Where is he? Search the area, now!" Jack and Duke crouched low under thick leaves, watching the dark silhouettes pass just steps away. Jack's heart nearly stopped. One hand gripped his pistol, the other gently held Duke still. The dog didn't move, eyes sharp and alert, tracking every step of their enemies. Once the men moved farther off, Jack carefully signaled Duke. Together they slipped deeper into the forest, staying low and silent. Minutes passed in breathless tension before they stumbled onto another path, one that led them toward the safe house Andrew had mentioned. Jack finally exhaled, his lungs burning with relief. He crouched next to Duke, looking at him with deep gratitude. "You saved me again, Duke. I don't know what I'd do without you." Duke wagged his tail softly, his eyes steady and filled with loyalty, as if to say, "You'll never have to find out." 2 small figures moved quietly under the canopy of night, making their way toward safety. Jack knew this wasn't over. The enemy wouldn't give up. They would keep coming until they got what they wanted. The deadly evidence Jack now carried. But he also knew he wasn't alone. Duke, loyal, brave, and smarter than most men Jack had known, was still by his side. And no matter what the future held, Jack believed with every ounce of his being that together, they could face anything. After a harrowing chase through the night, Jack and Duke finally arrived safely at the secret location Andrew had provided. A long, abandoned warehouse nestled deep in a quiet, suburban area, shielded by rows of thick, towering trees. The place had once been a contingency shelter, built by Andrew during his years as a special operative, but never actually used. Until now. Jack let out a slow breath as he stepped inside. The heavy door shut behind them with a cold, metallic echo that somehow brought a strange sense of comfort. The interior was sparse but functional, equipped with a few essential supplies, some old furniture, and a small, tidy bedroom. Everything about it reflected Andrew's methodical preparation for emergencies just like this. Jack sank into a wooden chair, his hand instinctively reaching down to stroke Duke's head. The dog remained tense, eyes scanning every corner of the space, alert to even the slightest movement. Duke hadn't relaxed once since the threat to Jack had become clear. Less than 30 minutes later, the familiar sound of a car engine approached. Jack gripped his pistol tightly, but as the door opened and Andrew stepped in, he exhaled with relief. Andrew locked the door behind him immediately, turning to Jack with a grave expression. "You okay, Jack? I was worried. I thought I wouldn't make it in time." Jack gave a faint smile, the tension in his chest easing just a little. "I'm all right now, thanks to Duke. He sensed the danger right away." Andrew glanced at Duke with admiration, nodding slightly in silent gratitude. Duke gave a small wag of the tail, but didn't break his focus. Andrew took a seat across from Jack, his face growing even more serious. Jack knew then. He couldn't keep the secret any longer. Quietly, he pulled the folded documents from his jacket pocket and placed them on the table between them. His voice lowered, heavy with urgency. "Andrew, this is why they're after me. What I found at the airport. It's not just illegal chemicals." Andrew took the file, flipping through the pages slowly. His eyes narrowed, his brows furrowed as he read. The deeper he got, the more his face darkened, shock giving way to anger. After a long moment, he set the file down, his hands trembling slightly. "Jack, this is insane. Biological weapons disguised as military pharmaceuticals? These toxins could wipe out entire populations in days. And the people behind this? They're the ones we were trained to trust." Jack looked down, pain flickering in his eyes as he watched his closest friend react. He knew exactly what Andrew was feeling, because he had felt it too. The organization behind this wasn't just corrupt. It was connected to the military itself, the very institution they had both sworn to protect with their lives. Andrew clenched his fists, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "This is too dangerous. If this gets out, the consequences would be catastrophic. Whoever's behind this, they won't stop until they get those files. Or silence anyone who knows." Jack nodded slowly. "That's why I couldn't tell anyone, except you. I don't know who else to trust. But now, we have to act." Andrew looked at him, their eyes locked. Two soldiers, bound by duty, both fully aware of the storm that was coming. This wasn't just a mission. It was a responsibility, a fight they couldn't walk away from. And for the first time in days, Jack didn't feel completely alone. He looked down at Duke, who lay silently nearby, his eyes fixed on the two men as if listening to every word. Duke hadn't let his guard down once, not since this all began. Outside, night slowly settled over the hidden shelter, wrapping it in a thin veil of cold mist. Jack lay down to rest for a while, though his mind kept racing, working through every possible step of what had to come next. Duke settled beside him, body still, eyes wide open, watching, listening, guarding. In the days that followed, even in temporary safety, Duke never left his post. He stayed awake night after night, ears perked, responding to every creak and whisper outside. Jack woke often, always finding Duke right there, silent and vigilant. And every time a wave of emotion would wash over him. Gratitude, loyalty, and something deeper still. One night, Jack stirred and opened his eyes. Duke was still sitting by the door, visibly tired, but refusing to rest. Jack called softly, "Come here, Duke. Just rest for a bit. You need it." Duke hesitated, then slowly approached, lying down beside Jack but keeping his gaze locked on the entrance. He couldn't relax, not yet. Jack ran his hand gently over Duke's head, his voice low, filled with warmth. "Thank you for always watching over me. We're going to get through this, I promise." Duke nudged his head into Jack's palm, a quiet gesture that said more than words ever could. He believed in Jack, with everything he had. The cold night still cloaked the outside of the hidden warehouse in silence. In that absolute stillness, the only sounds that echoed were the steady breaths of Jack and Duke. Jack lay quietly on the makeshift bed, eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling as his hand gently stroked the soft fur of Duke curled up right beside him. The danger had not passed, but Duke's presence always brought a strange sense of calm to Jack's heart, as if some kind of magic pushed the fear and tension away. Looking at Duke, sleeping in a tight circle next to him, Jack was suddenly swept back to memories of simpler days, before his life had been consumed by this whirlwind of danger. He remembered clearly those peaceful nights in his small house on the edge of Atlanta, when he and Duke would lie side by side, wrapped in the quiet warmth of their bond. Back then, after long days of training or duty, Jack would often sit on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees in the distance. Duke would sit silently beside him, resting his head on Jack's knee, his clear brown eyes following the last golden rays of daylight. It was as if Duke understood perfectly that Jack needed that silence to heal the invisible wounds left by the life of a soldier. One night, after returning from a particularly dangerous mission, Jack had fallen into a nightmare-ridden sleep. It was the first time he'd had to take a life in the field, a moment burned so deeply into his memory that it would never fade. That night, he dreamed of blood, of the wide, haunted eyes of the young soldier he had brought down, eyes that stared at him endlessly, filled with despair. In that dream, Jack felt himself suffocating, his body drenched in cold sweat. He tried to break free from the image, but the more he struggled, the deeper he was pulled into darkness. Just as he was about to lose himself completely, something warm and familiar reached in and pulled him back. Jack woke with a jolt, breathless, and the first thing he felt was Duke, close, solid, real. The loyal dog had gently laid his head on Jack's chest, his eyes filled with worry and quiet love. Somehow Duke seemed to understand exactly what Jack was going through. He didn't bark, he didn't move suddenly. He simply stayed there, still and present, radiating warmth and the kind of comfort that words could never offer. Jack's trembling hand reached up and rested on Duke's head, and slowly, the safety returned. His heart began to settle. In the darkness, he whispered, "Thank you, Duke. Thank you for always being here when I need you most." Duke pressed his head gently into Jack's palm, his breathing calm and steady, as if to say, "You're never alone." Since that night, every time Jack fell into nightmares, Duke was always the first to know, always the one to wake him with that same quiet presence, guiding him back from the shadows. Now, in the dim silence of the present, Jack held Duke a little closer. Gratitude flooded his chest. Even with danger closing in from all sides, the sense of peace Duke brought him never changed. This dog, his partner, his guardian, his friend, was the one soul who understood the dark corners of his mind without needing a single word. "I'm lucky to have you, Duke," Jack whispered, looking into the dog's deep, knowing eyes. "No matter what happens next, I know we'll get through it. Together." Duke responded with a gentle lick to Jack's hand, a simple gesture that said everything. Silence returned to the room, but this time, it held no fear, only trust, only the unbreakable bond between two souls who had walked through fire together. Jack slowly drifted into a deeper, calmer sleep, comforted by Duke's silent watch. The dog remained by his side, ever alert. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, ears perked, ready to react to the slightest sound. For Duke, protecting Jack wasn't just a job. It was a vow made from the heart, ever since the day Jack had saved him from a past filled with pain. As Jack slept on, the nightmares faded. The blood, the battlefield, the screams, all drifted away. In their place came softer memories, of peace, of quiet evenings, of a life shared between a man and his dog. In his dream, Jack saw himself once again on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees, Duke by his side, his hand gently stroking the dog's fur, both of them gazing at the last light disappearing beyond the distant horizon. Maybe that was the most precious thing life had ever given Jack, something no threat, no enemy, no darkness could ever take away. It was friendship. It was connection. It was the kind of unconditional love that only exists between a soldier and the loyal dog who had stood beside him through every storm. The first rays of morning sunlight slanted through the window of the hidden warehouse, gently waking Jack from his brief and restless sleep. Duke remained beside him, still and silent, but he hadn't truly slept. His ears stayed perked, body taut with constant vigilance. Jack could feel the tension radiating from his four-legged friend. He reached out and gently stroked Duke's head, hoping to calm the dog, and perhaps himself as well. Throughout the night, Jack and Andrew had pored over every page of the documents Jack had collected. The names mentioned sent chills down their spines. The deeper they read, the more they realized. The people behind the biological weapons operation weren't strangers. They were men they knew, men they had trusted. Some were even Jack's direct superiors. Now, the two sat across from each other at a modest desk, eyes fixed on a photo of Sheriff Harris, the man they had once respected, even admired. But the evidence in Jack's possession left no room for doubt. Harris was the insider, the traitor at the heart of it all. "I still can't believe it," Andrew muttered, his voice thick with disbelief and betrayal. "Harris, he's behind all of this?" Jack's expression hardened as he clenched the photo in his hand. "Now it makes sense. Every time I tried to dig deeper into the airport case, he redirected me, shuffled me off to another assignment. He didn't want me getting too close to the truth." Andrew nodded, fury rising in his eyes. "We have to be even more careful now, Jack. If Harris knows you've uncovered the truth, he won't stop until you're eliminated." At that moment, Duke suddenly stood up, a deep growl rising from his throat. Jack turned quickly, recognizing the signal. Duke had sensed something wrong. The dog crept toward the door, staring through a narrow slit with eyes sharp as blades. Jack and Andrew were on their feet instantly, ready for whatever was coming. Jack knelt beside Duke. "What is it, Duke?" Duke didn't respond with a bark, only a low, steady growl, body tense, warning them that danger was close. Jack moved cautiously to the window and peered outside. His stomach dropped. A large, unfamiliar K9 was approaching, bigger, leaner, and exuding aggression. This was no ordinary stray. Its movements were precise, disciplined, a trained attack dog, and it had spotted Duke. Before Jack could think, the unfamiliar dog lunged forward, snarling. Jack flung the door open just in time for Duke to dash out. The two dogs collided in a furious clash of muscle and teeth, their snarls and growls ripping through the air. It was a savage fight. Claws tore at dirt, jaws snapped in midair, and bodies slammed against the ground. Jack and Andrew stood frozen, helpless to intervene, their hearts pounding with fear. But Duke fought with a different kind of strength. Clever, calculated. He avoided direct strikes, maneuvering smartly, looking for the right moment to counter. And then it came. With a sudden burst of force, Duke took the upper hand, pinning the other dog down. The enemy K9 whimpered and fell still, exhausted and wounded. Duke remained standing, breathing heavily, blood streaking his coat. Not triumphant, only resolute. Jack ran forward, falling to his knees beside his loyal companion, wrapping his arms around him. "You did great, Duke. You did so good. I'm so sorry you had to go through this." Andrew scanned the perimeter, eyes sharp. When he was sure the immediate area was secure, he turned back to Jack, voice firm. "They know where we are now. We need to move, fast. Reinforcements won't be far behind." Jack nodded, lifting Duke carefully into his arms. He carried him inside and laid him gently on the small bed. Then, with focused care, he cleaned and treated every cut, every scratch. Duke lay quietly, his eyes fixed on Jack with trust and calm, as if to say, "I'll be all right, as long as you are." Jack sat beside Duke, his heart tightening with pain as he looked at the wounds on the body of his most loyal friend. He knew the fight was only getting more brutal, and this innocent companion of his was the one enduring the worst of it. But Jack also knew Duke had never once regretted any of it. The love and unconditional loyalty the dog had for him always rose above any physical pain. Andrew returned, his voice filled with concern but unwavering determination. "I just got in touch with someone I trust. He can help us find another place to hide. But we need to leave. Now." Jack looked down at Duke, gently stroking the dog's head, his voice soft and full of care. "You'll be okay, Duke. I promise I won't let you get hurt again." Duke pressed his head into Jack's palm, eyes full of trust complete faith in the promise of the person he loved most. Jack stood, and together with Andrew, began gathering everything they needed to leave the hideout. But in his heart, Jack's resolve to confront Harris, the traitor behind it all, was burning brighter than ever. He looked over at Andrew, his voice steady and firm. "It's time we face Harris head on. We can't keep running." Andrew met his eyes and nodded seriously. "I'm with you, Jack. We'll do whatever it takes to bring the truth into the light." After bringing Duke inside, Jack sat quietly at the bedside all night, his gaze never leaving the weary figure of his faithful companion. The wounds on Duke's body had been carefully bandaged, but Jack knew the physical pain wasn't what hurt the most. What cut deeper were the unseen wounds, the emotional toll from the vicious battle Duke had just survived. The night crept on. A faint light flickered over Duke's black coat, once sleek, now disheveled and matted. Suddenly, Duke's body began to tremble in waves. His legs twitched softly, his breathing quickened. He was deep in a nightmare, eyes tightly shut but still flinching, his small muzzle letting out faint, fearful whimpers. Jack felt the panic immediately. He leaned in close, his chest aching at the sight of his friend tormented by memories too painful to name. Gently, he laid a hand on Duke's side, his voice rising in a soothing whisper, warm and steady, like calming a frightened child. "It's okay, Duke. It's all over now. I'm right here, right beside you." Something in Jack's voice seemed to reach into the depths of Duke's mind. The tremors slowed. His breathing steadied. Slowly, Duke opened his brown eyes, still clouded with fear, and looked up at Jack as if searching for the safety that only he could provide. Jack didn't hesitate. He leaned in and gently wrapped his arms around Duke, letting the dog rest his head against his chest. His embrace was strong enough to reassure, soft enough to comfort. Duke pressed in closer, his body still tense but slowly beginning to calm beneath Jack's warmth. "I know what you just went through, Duke," Jack whispered softly into his ear, each word like balm to a trembling soul. "That fight was terrifying, but from this moment on, I won't let anyone hurt you again. You've protected me more times than I can count. Now it's my turn to protect you." Duke let out a low, quiet whimper and buried his head deeper into Jack's chest, as if surrendering all the lingering fear. Jack stroked his head gently, repeating his promise with quiet conviction. "We'll always stand together. Remember, Duke, neither of us ever has to face fear alone." Duke finally drifted off into a peaceful sleep in the safety of Jack's arms. Jack remained there, holding him close, his heart full of love, of deep gratitude, and of pain for everything Duke had endured. Outside, the night remained cold and full of danger. But inside that small, dimly lit room, two souls, bound together in a way words could never fully capture, found peace and strength in each other. And Jack knew without a doubt that whatever lay ahead, he and Duke would face it together, like a sacred promise that would never fade. The cold night blanketed the entire suburban outskirts of Atlanta. Inside the dimly lit office of the city police department, Chief Robert Harris stood motionless, his piercing gaze fixed on the window, watching as darkness slowly swallowed the city below. In his mind, the plan to eliminate Jack Carter, the only threat capable of exposing his entire operation, had been laid out in meticulous detail. He couldn't allow anyone to discover that he, the head of the police force, a supposed symbol of safety and justice, was in fact the mastermind behind the most dangerous biological weapons trafficking network in Georgia's history. For over a year, Harris had secretly exploited the power of his position to facilitate the movement of deadly chemical shipments, disguising them as humanitarian aid convoys. It was a flawless plan, one so carefully constructed that not even the most seasoned FBI agents had suspected a thing. If everything unfolded as intended, Harris would soon hold the power to manipulate the entire local government, expanding his influence far beyond state borders, perhaps even nationally. But if exposed, the collapse would be catastrophic, dragging down a vast web of powerful figures who had silently backed him from the shadows. The consequences would be unimaginable. That was why Jack Carter had become the single greatest threat, not just because he had once been Harris's most elite officer, but because Jack now possessed undeniable evidence, documents, recordings, and encrypted files, enough to destroy Harris's career, his reputation, and his life in a single night. Harris knew Jack wouldn't surrender easily. He couldn't be bought or intimidated. After all, Harris himself had trained Jack to be a soldier of unwavering loyalty to justice, an ideal that had now become the very thing standing in Harris's way. And that meant Jack had to be eliminated, at any cost. A soft knock pulled Harris from his thoughts. A man in a dark coat stepped into the room, his hawk-like eyes locking on to Harris's. "Sir, we've confirmed Carter and Agent Andrews' location. They're hiding out in an abandoned warehouse north of Pine Road. The hideout is well concealed, but our intel is solid." Harris turned, his eyes flashing with cold finality. "Good work, Peters. This time there can be no mistakes. I don't want Carter walking out alive. The evidence he holds is the greatest threat to us. You must retrieve it, whatever it takes." "Yes, sir," Peters replied without hesitation, his voice firm and steady. As the door closed behind him, Harris sank into his large black leather chair, his eyes narrowing with danger. He had never imagined he'd have to give the order to kill one of his own, especially not Jack Carter, the best soldier he had ever trained. But now Jack was too great a liability. Harris was prepared to sacrifice anything, honor, loyalty, even his own life, to protect the biological weapons operation he had spent years constructing. For him, success meant absolute power, a force that could transcend all laws and moral boundaries. But failure would bury him in darkness, where death might be the kindest outcome. There was only one way forward. Jack Carter had to disappear, permanently. In the minutes that followed, Harris reviewed every part of the plan. The attack would take place at dawn, the moment when Jack and Andrew would be at their lowest level of alertness. A strike team of professional assassins, highly trained, would approach from multiple directions, cutting off any escape routes. A secondary unit had been deployed to block nearby access roads, preventing outside interference. This time Harris would make sure Jack wouldn't get away. Back at the hideout, Jack still sat quietly beside Duke. The night dragged on, but his mind remained restless, haunted by the question of how to bring down Chief Harris. Jack knew all too well. Harris was dangerous, intelligent, and always one step ahead. If they didn't act with precision and clarity, they would be walking straight into his trap. Andrew entered the room, his expression tense, though he tried to keep calm. He placed a detailed map of the Atlanta outskirts on the table, locked eyes with Jack, and said, "We need a clear plan, Jack." Jack took a deep breath, his eyes drifting to Duke, who lay beside him, his body still not fully recovered from the brutal fight the day before. Jack's chest tightened with guilt and sorrow, but he knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. He turned to Andrew, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. "I've thought it through, Andrew. We need to move before sunrise. But this time, I'm not just running. We're going to face Harris head-on, shut down his operation before he makes another move." Andrew nodded, a spark of approval lighting in his eyes. "I'm with you. Harris is too dangerous. If we don't act first, we'll always be at his mercy. And that's far riskier. But what's your plan?" Jack stared at the map, silent for a long moment before speaking. "We need to surprise him. Instead of waiting for him to come to us, we lure him into a trap, somewhere he'd never expect. He wants to kill me and take the evidence, right? So we let him believe I'll show up at a different location. But that location will be our trap." Andrew thought for a moment, then offered a faint smile. "Smart move, Jack. We can leak false intel through his informants, draw his forces to that site. Meanwhile, you and I close in on where Harris actually is, gather more evidence, and expose him before he even knows what hit him." Jack nodded firmly. "Exactly, but it's risky. Are you in?" Andrew met his eyes without hesitation. "I've always been in. We're partners, Jack. Facing danger is what we do." Jack smiled gently, clapping a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." They quickly got to work, mapping out every detail of the plan. Meanwhile, Duke lay beside Jack, watching them closely with calm, intelligent eyes, as if he understood every word. Though still weak, the dog remained ready to protect Jack at any cost. Outside, dawn approached. The tension thickened with every passing minute. Jack knelt beside Duke, looking into his loyal companion's eyes. "We're about to face the biggest fight yet, Duke. But don't worry, I'll protect you this time. I won't let you get hurt again." Duke gently licked Jack's hand, his eyes shining with absolute trust. Jack stood, filled with courage and determination. He knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but he would do whatever it took to bring the truth to light, to protect those he loved, especially Duke, the most loyal companion fate had ever given him. Dawn broke over the Atlanta suburbs, but the sky remained unusually dark and heavy. Inside the modest hideout, Jack and Andrew were still rushing to finalize their secret plan. Jack's eyes kept drifting to Duke, the loyal K9, still exhausted but doing his best to stand, muscles tense, ready for anything. Suddenly, the distant roar of engines and rapid footsteps echoed from outside. Jack spun around, eyes locking with Andrew's. Duke sprang up, ears perked, his body rigid with alertness. They all knew in that instant. Harris had lost patience. He was striking earlier than expected. "Do we have another way out, Andrew?" Jack asked urgently. Andrew pulled the map, pointing to a narrow corner. "Here, I prepped an emergency exit, but we have to move fast. There's too many of them." Outside, Harris's forces had completely surrounded the warehouse. Heavy boots pounded the earth like thunder. Harris stood behind the front line, his expression icy and unflinching. He gave a sharp command. "Search the entire building. Find Jack Carter. If he resists, kill him." Jack and Andrew moved quickly toward the escape route Andrew had prepared in advance. Duke followed closely at Jack's side, his steps slower than usual due to his injuries. But his eyes were still burning with purpose. As they reached the back exit, a sudden barrage of gunfire erupted, cutting off their path. Harris's men had discovered the escape attempt and launched a brutal assault to split them up. In the chaos, Jack was shoved in another direction, separated from Duke and Andrew by the thick smoke and the swarm of soldiers. "Duke!" Jack shouted in panic, frantically scanning the chaos for any sign of his companion. But the gunfire, the shouting, and the choking smoke had swallowed everything. Duke, too, realized he'd been separated. He froze, turning in circles, eyes wide with panic. Though wounded and in pain, only one thought consumed his mind. Jack was in danger, and he had to find him. Now, Jack took a deep breath, glancing down at Duke, who lay beside him, his body still not fully recovered from the brutal fight the day before. Jack's chest tightened with sorrow, but he knew they couldn't afford to delay any longer. He turned to Andrew, his voice steady and full of resolve. "I've thought this through, Andrew. We need to leave before sunrise, but this time I'm done running. I want us to confront Harris directly and dismantle his operation before he has a chance to strike." Andrew nodded, a look of agreement flashing in his eyes. "I'm with you. Harris is too dangerous. If we don't take the initiative, we'll stay on the defensive and the risk will only grow. But how exactly do you plan to do this?" Jack stared at the map for a long moment, then finally spoke. "We'll catch him off guard. Instead of waiting for him to come here, we set a trap somewhere he'd least expect. He wants to eliminate me and retrieve the evidence, so we'll make him believe I'll be showing up at a different location. But it'll be a setup." Andrew paused, then smiled slightly. "I like it. We feed false intel to Harris's informants, lure his forces to that site, and while they're distracted, you and I get close to his actual location, gather more evidence, and expose him before he knows what hit him." Jack nodded firmly. "Exactly. But it's risky. Are you ready for this, Andrew?" Andrew met Jack's gaze without hesitation. "Always. We're partners, Jack. Facing danger is what we do." Jack offered a quiet smile, patting his friend on the shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." They quickly moved to finalize the plan, while Duke remained beside Jack, his eyes locked on them as if he understood every word. Though still weak, Duke was fully prepared to defend Jack with everything he had. Outside, dawn was approaching. The tension rose as the moment of reckoning drew near. Jack knelt and looked deeply into Duke's eyes. His voice soft. "We're about to face the biggest fight yet, Duke. But don't worry. I'll protect you this time. I won't let you get hurt again." Duke gently licked Jack's hand, his eyes radiating pure trust. Jack stood up, filled with determination and courage. He knew the battle ahead would be far from easy, but he was ready to do whatever it took to bring the truth to light and protect those he loved, especially Duke, the most loyal friend life had ever given him. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, but the skies over suburban Atlanta had an unnatural gloom. Inside the small hideout, Jack and Andrew moved quickly, finalizing the secret plan they had just agreed on. Jack's eyes, still heavy with worry, drifted again to Duke, the loyal K9, still fatigued but standing firm, muscles taut and ready for whatever came next. Suddenly, the thunder of heavy footsteps and roaring engines shattered the silence. Jack snapped his head toward Andrew, his eyes sharp with tension. Duke jumped to his feet, ears standing tall, his whole body bracing for what they all knew had come. Harris had lost patience and launched his assault sooner than expected. "Any other exits, Andrew?" Jack asked quickly, his voice taut with urgency. Andrew unrolled the map, pointing to a narrow corner. "Here, I set up an emergency exit, but we have to move now. They've brought an army." Outside, Harris's forces swarmed the perimeter, boots pounding like thunder. Harris stood behind the front line, eyes cold and commanding, signaling the troops forward. "Search everything. Find Jack Carter. If he resists, kill him." Jack and Andrew rushed toward the escape route Andrew had prepared in advance. Duke moved closely at Jack's side, his injured limbs slowing him slightly. But his gaze never wavered, fierce and resolute. Just as they reached the emergency exit at the rear, a sudden burst of gunfire erupted, cutting off their path. Harris's forces had anticipated the escape and launched a direct assault to scatter them. In the chaos, Jack was shoved in another direction, separated from Duke and Andrew in a cloud of dust and confusion. "Duke!" Jack yelled, his voice raw with desperation as he searched frantically for his loyal companion. But the gunfire, the shouting, and the thick haze had swallowed everything. Duke realized he'd been separated. He froze, turning in frantic circles, eyes wide with panic. Though wounded and in pain, only one thought thundered in Duke's heart. Jack was in danger, and he had to find him. Now, meanwhile, Jack was pushed into a narrow corner, and when he turned around, his blood ran cold. Harris was standing right there, his eyes sharp with hatred. "It's over, Carter!" Harris snarled, a cold smile curling at his lips. "You should have stayed out of this." Jack clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with fury. "You'll never get away with this, Harris. The truth will come out." Harris gave a chilling laugh, slowly pulling out his gun and aiming it straight at Jack. "Truth doesn't matter if you're dead. Goodbye, Carter." Just as he prepared to pull the trigger, a powerful bark rang out from behind. Harris spun around, startled. But before he could react, Duke lunged at him, using the last of his strength to slam him to the ground. "Duke!" Jack shouted, his heart seizing at the sight of his injured dog throwing himself into the fight. Duke fought ferociously, but his injuries slowed him, and Harris retaliated with brutal force. In the critical moment, Jack dove in, wresting the gun from Harris's grip and knocking him unconscious with a decisive blow. Jack immediately dropped to his knees beside Duke, who was now lying motionless, his breath shallow. Jack's heart broke as he cradled the wounded dog, tears streaming down his face. "Duke, please, hang on, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to get hurt. Just stay with me. Please!" Duke opened his weary brown eyes, filled with love and loyalty, and nudged Jack's hand gently, as if to say everything would be okay. Even in his pain, Duke licked Jack's hand, comforting him one last time before slipping into unconsciousness. Andrew arrived just then, eyes wide with alarm. "Jack, we have to go now. Harris will wake up any moment and his men are closing in." Jack clutched Duke to his chest, lifting him carefully, his face set with fierce resolve. "I'm not leaving him behind. Whatever happens, we save him." Andrew gave a tight nod and led the way as they dashed through enemy fire, doing everything they could to escape. Jack's chest ached with every breath as he felt Duke's heartbeat weaken, but he refused to stop. Duke had saved his life, and now it was his turn to return the favor. Behind them, the hideout was engulfed in flames. Gunfire cracked through the air, chaos reigned, but Jack's only focus was on the dog in his arms. Duke, who had risked everything without hesitation. Duke, who had always been there. Jack whispered as he ran, voice full of emotion. "Hold on, Duke. Don't give up. You saved me. Now it's my turn. We're going to get through this together." Despite the shadows and gunfire closing in, Jack had never felt more determined, because as long as Duke was still with him, as long as they were together, there was nothing they couldn't survive. And in that frigid, fire-lit night, the bond between soldier and dog burned brighter than ever. Unbreakable, unshakable. Duke's sacrifice, his love, and his loyalty had become Jack's greatest strength. Together they would face whatever came next. Dawn broke under a sky smeared with grief, casting a dull gray light over the quiet shelter where Jack sat in silence. It was as if the heavens themselves mourned the unbearable loss weighing on his shoulders. In the dimness of the room, his gaze remained fixed on Duke, the loyal canine companion lying still on the bed. Each shallow breath Duke took was a struggle, fragile, labored, and Jack felt every one of them as if they were tearing pieces from his own soul. He knew with a dreadful clarity that these breaths might be their last moments together. Andrew stood nearby, eyes red and glistening, his silence more profound than words. He didn't dare intrude on the farewell, choosing instead to wait quietly outside the doorway, granting Jack the space he needed to say goodbye to the most faithful friend he'd ever known. Jack leaned forward slowly, his hands trembling as he gently stroked Duke's fur, now matted with blood and dirt. Beneath his palm, he could feel the slowing rhythm of Duke's heartbeat, and it shattered him. His chest ached with the kind of pain that couldn't be spoken, only endured. "You fought so bravely, Duke. I'm so proud of you," Jack whispered, his voice cracking as tears finally spilled down his cheeks, heavy and relentless, soaking the face that had endured too much pain for too long. Duke's eyes fluttered open, slow and weak, those deep brown orbs locking onto Jack's with a clarity that pierced straight through. He seemed to summon every last ounce of strength to hold that gaze, to see Jack one final time. In that moment, memories flooded back into Duke's mind, soft, warm images of the very first time they met, when he was just a wounded, trembling pup, abandoned and afraid by the side of a road. Jack had cradled him in his arms with kindness and warmth, healing his first wounds not just with medicine, but with love. From that day on, Duke had made a vow in his heart to protect this man with everything he had, to his very last breath. Duke's eyes shimmered with emotion as he stared into Jack's tear-filled gaze. He nudged his head weakly into Jack's trembling hand, needing one final touch, one last reminder of the warmth and bond they'd shared. Then, with a quiet exhale, his eyes slowly closed, and his breathing faded into stillness. Time froze. Jack didn't move, couldn't move. His world had stopped. He stared at the still form of Duke, willing it to stir, praying it was all just some cruel illusion. With shaking hands, he gently tried to rouse him, whispering softly, begging silently, hoping that Duke would open his eyes, wag his tail, greet him like he always had. But Duke's body was cold now, lifeless in his arms. The silence in the room was unbearable, a void so vast it swallowed everything. Jack felt as if his soul had been ripped apart. A part of him had died with Duke. He cradled Duke tightly, burying his face into the familiar fur, his body racked with sobs he couldn't control. His mind flooded with memories, vivid, beautiful, and unbearably painful. Their missions together, the long patrols in stormy nights, the quiet afternoons resting after hard days, All of it flashed through Jack's mind like a film on rewind, each frame another stab of grief. "I'm sorry, Duke," he choked through the tears. "I couldn't protect you the way you always protected me. I owe you my life, and I promise, I swear, I will not let your death be for nothing. I will make them pay for this, even if it costs me everything." Andrew finally stepped into the room, placing a steadying hand on Jack's shoulder, his own voice thick with emotion. "Jack, I'm truly sorry. Duke was a warrior. And even more, he was the best friend anyone could ever have. We won't let his sacrifice be in vain." Jack wiped his tears and raised his head, his eyes burning with a resolve fiercer than ever before. "Andrew," he said, voice low but unwavering, "I'm done running. I'm going to face Harris. I'm going to bring him to justice with my own hands. That's what Duke gave his life for." Andrew met his gaze with solemn intensity and nodded. "I'll be right beside you, Jack. We'll fight this together. I promise you, Duke's death will not be in vain." Jack turned back to Duke's still body, gently laying him down and pulling a light blanket over him with the utmost care and reverence. He bowed his head, whispering one last goodbye to the faithful companion who had stood by him through every harrowing mission and perilous night. "Rest now, Duke. I'll never forget you, and I promise I'll keep going, keep fighting, to be worthy of your sacrifice." Rising to his feet, Jack clenched his fists and stepped out of the room with Andrew by his side. The fear that had once gripped his heart was gone, replaced by an unwavering determination and a hunger for justice, stronger than anything he had ever known. Outside, the sun began to rise more clearly over the horizon, scattering the darkness that had lingered for days. Jack knew the final battle was drawing near, the hardest trial of his life, but he was no longer afraid, because now he carried the spirit of Duke within him, the strength, loyalty, and love of the greatest friend he'd ever had. The pain of loss remained carved into his chest, but it had transformed into a source of strength, steady and unshakable. It was Duke's legacy, the fuel that would drive him to the end of this mission. Jack's steps were firm now, full of purpose. He knew exactly what had to be done. No matter the danger, no matter the cost, he would never back down. He would confront Harris face to face and reveal the full truth to the world, no matter how deep the corruption ran or how high it reached. It was a vow, Jack's final promise to Duke, the one who had laid down his life to protect him, the most loyal soul he had ever known. And Jack knew that as long as he lived, he would keep that promise, no matter what. In the days that followed Duke's heartbreaking death, Jack's resolve burned hotter than ever. He channeled all his grief into a mission of absolute focus. Expose Harris and dismantle the dark web of corruption he had built. The loss of Duke ignited a fire in Jack's heart, quiet but relentless, that pushed him forward through exhaustion and grief, empowering him to fight without hesitation, without fear. With Andrew's help, and the support of a few trusted allies, Jack began to reinforce the case. Night after night, he pored over every detail, connecting every thread, stitching together the full picture of the monstrous conspiracy Harris had spent years constructing. Whenever doubt crept in, Jack closed his eyes and saw Duke's unwavering gaze, the one that had never faltered in battle, never wavered in danger. That memory alone was enough to steel his resolve. A few days later, under a gray, heavy sky, Jack and Andrew walked into the downtown Atlanta FBI office, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. They were greeted by Senior Agent Laura Mason, who had been secretly tracking the case for some time. As she reviewed the thick file of evidence Jack handed her, her expression shifted from surprise to grave seriousness. She understood immediately the magnitude of what had landed on her desk. "Do you understand what you're stepping into, Jack?" Laura asked, her voice tight with concern but edged with steel. "I do, Agent Mason," Jack replied, his eyes unwavering. "And I'm ready to do whatever it takes to bring this truth to light." Laura studied him for a long moment and saw it. The loss, the fire, the quiet fury that couldn't be extinguished. Finally, she gave a firm nod. "All right. I believe you. We'll move immediately." But know this. Harris is powerful, deeply connected. This won't be easy. Jack took a deep breath and answered with quiet intensity. I know. But I'm not alone. I have my cause. I have loyal allies, and most of all, I have Duke, the friend who gave everything for justice. I won't let him down. The operation began without delay. The FBI and local law enforcement launched a coordinated campaign to hit every key point of Harris's operation. But just as Laura had warned, it was no easy task. Harris's network was vast and well defended. Every step forward came with risk, sacrifice, and cost. At last, the decisive moment came. Intelligence revealed Harris's final hideout, a secluded estate deep within the forests outside the city. Under cover of night, Jack joined a covert task force moving silently through the trees, heart pounding but steady. This was it, the final reckoning. And somewhere beyond the darkness, Jack felt Duke's presence, steadying his breath, guiding his feet. He wasn't just walking into the lion's den. He was walking in with purpose, with justice burning in his chest, and with the memory of a fallen friend pushing him forward, stronger than ever before. The raid struck like lightning. Blinding floodlights tore through the darkness, accompanied by the booming voice from a loudspeaker. Robert Harris, this is the FBI. You're surrounded. Surrender immediately. For the first time, the always calm and calculating Harris showed unmistakable signs of panic. Yet even cornered, he refused to surrender without a fight. Gunfire erupted in a fierce storm, echoing across the forest as the standoff stretched on for hours. Jack was on the front line, each bullet he fired carrying the weight of his grief and the fire of his resolve. Every shot fueled by the memory of Duke and the innocent lives lost. Amidst the chaos and gunfire, the tide of the battle finally turned. Harris, bloodied and breathless, was forced into a corner with no way out. Jack stepped forward, his gaze cold and heavy with pain, as he stared down the man who had caused so much destruction. It's over, Harris, Jack said, his voice like steel. You've caused enough pain. It's time to pay for it. Harris let out a bitter laugh, his eyes dark with defeat. Carter, do you really think you've changed anything? What you lost, you'll never get it back. That dog, he's dead, isn't he? Jack inhaled slowly, fighting the rage rising inside him. He held Harris's gaze, his voice calm but unshakable. Duke gave his life to save mine, so I could stand here and bring people like you to justice. His death wasn't meaningless. You'll live the rest of your life knowing you failed. The FBI quickly moved in and took Harris into custody, ending the long, brutal manhunt. One by one, the pillars of his operation collapsed. His co-conspirators were rounded up, and the entire dark plot involving biological weapons was finally dragged into the light of justice. In the days that followed, Jack and Duke's story flooded the headlines. But Jack didn't care for the spotlight. His purpose was never glory. It was truth, and honoring the loyalty and sacrifice of the friend who had fought beside him to the end. At a special press conference, Jack stood before a sea of cameras, calm but solemn, his eyes still shadowed with grief. Today, I'm not standing here for myself. I'm standing for Duke, the partner and friend who gave his life to protect me and to protect the truth. He taught me what loyalty means, what unconditional love looks like, and above all, he reminded me that justice is always worth fighting for, no matter the cost. He paused for a moment, his eyes glistening, voice thick with emotion but unwavering. I'll keep fighting, not just for Duke, but for everyone out there who silently defends what's right. Duke never gave up, and neither will I. The room erupted in heartfelt applause. Jack stepped down, his heart still aching with loss, but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that from this moment forward, he was living not just for himself, but to carry forward the legacy Duke had left behind. And in Jack's heart, Duke would always burn bright, a guiding light, a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and justice, a reminder of everything worth standing for, right up to his final breath. The sky over Atlanta that day was unusually serene and clear. as if the heavens themselves were trying to soothe the hearts of everyone gathered for this extraordinary ceremony. At the military cemetery, rows of chairs were arranged in perfect order, surrounded by fresh flowers, creating a scene that was both solemn and steeped in profound sorrow. This funeral was unlike any that had taken place here before. It was held in honor of Duke, the loyal K-9, who had given his life in the fight against a dangerous criminal organization. The powerful story of Duke's bravery and sacrifice had touched countless hearts, drawing people here not just to say goodbye, but to pay tribute to a courageous soul who had safeguarded justice and the lives of others. Jack walked slowly to the podium. Dressed in full military uniform, his eyes were deep pools of emotion as they fell on the small box draped with the American flag, the urn containing Duke's ashes. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, the pain of loss still sharp in his chest with every thought of his fallen companion. He looked out at the crowd, meeting their tearful, attentive eyes, and began to speak. His voice, though choked with emotion, carried clear and strong. Today, we are not just here to mourn a dog. We are here to honor a friend, a hero who gave his entire life to protect others, to defend justice and truth. Duke was not just a working dog. He was an inseparable part of my life, a loyal teammate, a friend I can never replace. Jack paused, emotion welling up in his eyes. He looked down at Duke's framed photo, displayed among the flowers, and his heart twisted at the memories flooding back. Duke saved my life more than once, Jack continued, his voice softer now. When nightmares of war kept me up at night, he was always the first one by my side, grounding me, helping me find peace. In the field, when danger struck, he never hesitated to throw himself into the line of fire to protect me. Until his very last breath, I can still see his eyes, that unwavering gaze of a friend willing to give everything for me. He paused again, needing a moment to collect himself, his gaze drifting as if replaying each precious memory. There's something I need everyone here to know, he said at last, his voice regaining strength. Duke was more than just a companion. He taught me the true meaning of loyalty, of courage, and of unconditional love. In the hardest moments, he gave me the strength to keep going, to never give up, no matter how dark or hopeless things seemed. The crowd remained still, hanging on every word. Veterans, young officers, even civilians dabbed at their eyes, deeply moved by Jack's heartfelt tribute. Jack turned to look at Andrew, his closest friend and partner in battle, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. And today, Jack continued, his voice firm and proud, I want to make something clear. Duke was not just a dog. He was a soldier, a friend, a true hero. His sacrifice changed my life, and the lives of everyone here. He deserves to be remembered as nothing less. With those final words, Jack stepped toward the small box holding Duke's ashes. He gently placed his hand on it, as if pouring into it all the love and gratitude he could no longer express in words. Then, with tender reverence, he laid atop it Duke's old collar, the one he had worn during every mission. A final gesture, a farewell filled with honor and respect. As Jack stepped down from the podium, the entire crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Tears streamed down many faces. One by one, people stepped forward, placing flowers and small tokens beside Duke's portrait, each offering a piece of their gratitude for the dog who had given everything, for people and for justice. The ceremony slowly came to a close, but the air remained thick with reverence and emotion, lingering long after the final words had been spoken. Jack stood quietly beside Andrew, watching as the last of the mourners drifted away from the service, a faint sense of solace settling into his heart, though the wound had not yet begun to heal. I believe Duke will always live on in all of our hearts, Andrew said softly, resting a hand on Jack's shoulder. Jack nodded, his voice calm yet unwavering. I know he will. Duke left behind a legacy far greater than any of us could have imagined, a legacy of love and unconditional sacrifice for others. I'll spend the rest of my life living in a way that honors that sacrifice. Before leaving the cemetery, Jack turned back one last time. His eyes, filled with a quiet tenderness, also held an unshakable resolve. He knew that while Duke no longer walked beside him in this world, their bond, Duke's loyalty, and the beautiful memories they'd shared would live on forever in his heart. That would be the strength that carried him forward, the strength to live, to fight, and to protect the values Duke had given his life defending. Bathed in the soft golden light of the afternoon sun, Jack walked away from the cemetery, his steps more resolute than ever. He knew, without a doubt, that somewhere above, Duke was still watching over him, still walking beside him through every journey yet to come. A friend, a four-legged hero, whose presence would never fade from his heart or the hearts of those Duke had protected. 6 months after Duke's passing, the warm spring sun cast a bright glow over a newly established K-9 training center nestled in the outskirts of Atlanta. At the entrance, a large, dignified sign bore the name Duke's Legacy in bold golden letters. It stood as both a symbol and a promise, the greatest gift Jack could offer in memory of his loyal companion, a way to continue Duke's noble spirit and boundless courage. Jack moved slowly through the expansive training grounds, his eyes scanning the field where dogs of all breeds were being trained under the careful guidance of experienced handlers. Each dog here was being taught through a method inspired by the very qualities Duke had embodied: unwavering loyalty, fearless bravery, and a love that asked for nothing in return. Stopping beside one of the smaller practice yards, Jack couldn't help but smile as he watched a group of young pups playfully tumbling through early drills, their excitement and innocence lighting up the space. Among them was a golden-brown puppy, his eyes gleaming with energy and curiosity. The little dog bounded happily toward Jack, tail wagging furiously as if greeting an old friend. Jack knelt down and gently scooped the pup into his arms, his expression softening with affection and something deeper, a quiet hope. "Little Duke," he said, his voice warm, "you did great today. I know the real Duke would be proud of you." The little pup, whom Jack had lovingly named Little Duke, licked his face joyfully, those bright, innocent eyes seeming to understand the weight and honor carried in the name it bore. As Jack gently stroked Little Duke's soft fur, his heart quieted for a moment, and memories of the first time he met Duke filled his mind like a familiar song. Jack knew no dog could ever replace Duke in his heart, but raising Little Duke and founding this training center was his way of honoring and continuing the legacy Duke had left behind, a legacy built on sacrifice, loyalty, and love. He believed Duke's spirit would always walk beside them, watching over every pup that passed through these gates and every life they would go on to protect. He softly set Little Duke back down. The puppy bounded away excitedly, rejoining the group of other eager trainees. From across the field, Andrew approached, his expression warm as he placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Jack, this place, it's amazing. Duke would be so proud of you." Jack smiled gently, his eyes shining with pride and quiet certainty. "I know Duke's still here, Andrew. Not a single day goes by where I don't feel him near. He may no longer be beside us in flesh and blood, but his legacy, his spirit, it lives on forever." Andrew nodded in agreement, his gaze filled with understanding. "You've done something incredible, Jack. Not just for Duke, but for this city, and for every future generation that walks through these doors. This is how you honor a true hero." Jack took one last look around the center. The pain that once felt unbearable had eased, replaced now with hope and a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a K-9 training facility, it was a sanctuary, a living testament to a friend who had changed his life forever. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sky, Jack sat quietly on the front porch. Little Duke lay curled beside his feet, asleep and breathing softly, his tiny frame rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Jack gazed out toward the lavender sky, a deep, unexpected calm settling over him. He whispered into the breeze, as if speaking to a friend beyond the clouds. "Do you see this, Duke? Everything you left us, it's beautiful. I know you're still watching from heaven. And I promise you, I'll keep protecting this city. I'll make sure you're always proud of me." A soft gust of wind brushed across Jack's face, gentle and warm, like a reply only the heart could hear. He smiled faintly, comforted by its touch. Leaning down, he stroked little Duke's head. The puppy nudged into his palm, as if aware of the weight he now carried, the duty, the honor, and the legacy of a hero. Jack rose and stepped back into the house, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more battles to face. But he was no longer alone. Beside him were Andrew, little Duke, and others who shared his mission, people who believed in the ideals Duke had once protected with his life. The next day marked the official launch of the Duke's Legacy program. Across Atlanta, the media and the community gathered to celebrate. The story of Jack and Duke had touched hearts far and wide. Duke's loyalty, his sacrifice, and the love he had given unconditionally had become a symbol of hope, an inspiration to all. Standing at the podium during the grand opening, Jack faced the crowd, little Duke seated proudly at his side. His voice was calm, steady, and clear. "Today, we begin a new chapter, born from the legacy Duke left behind. Duke never truly left us. His spirit, his loyalty, and his courage live on in every dog trained here. I hope that from this place, many more Dukes will rise, so that this city will always be guarded by the best friends we could ever ask for." The crowd erupted in heartfelt applause. Gratitude and emotion filled the air. Jack looked down at little Duke and smiled, knowing the future was wide open. There would be new challenges ahead, but fear had no place in him now. Looking up into the clear blue sky, Jack felt Duke's presence, strong and reassuring. Somewhere above, his best friend was watching, wearing a proud smile. He whispered in his heart, "Thank you for everything, Duke. I promise I won't let you down. Rest well, my friend." Then he looked down at little Duke, who wagged his tail with joy, his bright eyes full of promise. "We've got work to do, haven't we, little Duke?" And as if answering, little Duke barked, a single strong bark that echoed with purpose, ready to walk beside Jack into a new beginning, one filled with hope, justice, and the enduring love that Duke had left behind. The story of Jack and Duke has come to an end, but without a doubt, the legacy of loyalty, courage, and the profound bond between human and dog will forever remain in our hearts. Duke wasn't just a dog. He was a true hero, one who gave everything to protect justice and the person he loved most. Life may have taken Duke's presence away, but the ideals and legacy he left behind will continue to live on. What did you think of this touching story? If you were in Jack's place, how would you honor your loyal companion? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to stay with us for more heartfelt stories about our four-legged heroes.